is now May 17th. It has been about 6 weeks since we have been presenting these services online. As you can tell from the echo in my voice, there is no one in the sanctuary to fear or, well, being smart about staying home and not having that mountaintop experience with our healthcare community that does not want to be overwhelmed. So I thought I would go ahead and talk about these weeks, this worship service that we create every single week. So how do you create a worship atmosphere each Sunday? We hear from the medical director at the White House, as well as other medical soothsayers, that this plague has a huge chance of happening again in the fall. So is this isolation period a dress rehearsal? Are we going to keep going to church via the internet? Can you translate your local weekly church service into a meaningful service on the internet? It takes dedication, but I digress. Let's get to what Charles Fillmore said about this. And although Charles wasn't alive to see the plague, he did have a clue as to how to handle worship without a building. Charles Fillmore, who was the co-founder of Unity, states, Jesus Christ said, God is spirit. And those worshiping him must worship in spirit and truth. This means that we must exercise our spiritual faculties in the worship and the prayer that lead to spiritual healing. Charles also stated, we live and move and have our being in life, mind life. You can think of your life as mental, and every faculty will begin to buzz with new life. Your life will never wane if you keep in the consciousness of it as mind or spirit. But it will increase and express in fullness in your body. This reminds me of the unity law of mind action. In other words, Charles knew that God is basically a head trip that results in a physical presence. But again, I digress. The definition of a church service, the actual church service, is a gathering together of worshipers to be taught whatever holy text they revere and to be encouraged in their faith. Worship is an actual commandment in Deuteronomy 30, verse 16. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. Watching a church service, even on a computer, can bring great benefits. But let's get to that subject later, though, because I hope that eventually time will lead me to this land I am entering to possess. This land where we all join everyone in a group setting once more. Let's talk about the actual mechanics of church worship when you don't have a building or an audience. After receiving a letter from Unity Worldwide, those individuals normally recording and presenting the average USCSA service is Gary, myself, Tamara, as well as the board of directors. They all met and we discussed how much worship benefits everyone in the average service. Does it add to the church service if we keep that same schedule and recording the service for online presentations? After discussing several options, we decided to record the entire normal schedule and then utilize a popular application called YouTube. Why YouTube? Why not something else? Because YouTube can be linked to so many other applications of social media. Hopefully Hopefully, it wouldn't be that challenging to use for the average churchgoer. In this time of social distancing, we are still very close and connected with social media. But again, I'm getting lost in geekdom, something I always do. The human attention span, according to some research, is exactly 8 seconds. Just 8 seconds. And this period of time is down from a few years ago, when it was a whopping 12 seconds. This is largely attributed to our smartphone, personal application, cyber culture. Can you worship in 8 seconds? Why put on a worship service at all? Certainly, we could do better than an infomercial. After thinking about this issue, we then divided the worship service into segments. And this was done because human beings have 2 types of attention. Transient attention, which is that 8-second stuff. Like when you wave keys in front of your face. I have problems with that. Or selective sustained attention, also known as focused attention. This is commonly about 20 minutes. This kind of attention is for movies, lectures, unity talks, etc. But what is the attention span for God? What is the perfect formula to help a viewer focus on their individual form of worship, as they would have experienced had we all been together in this beautiful sanctuary? For that matter, does God care if we just skip church during a coronavirus epidemic, since we can't visit a physical building and maybe taking a church vacation? If you read Hebrews chapter 12, verses 28 and 29, you learn, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. This means, well, what does it mean to you? To me, it means that God is paying attention, whether we are or not. Why did we include songs in the recorded version of the service? Why not just shut the speaker and get the service over with? Because of Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19, which talks about addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart. Singing is definitely a part of worship, so we made sure that we included it every week. One of the best things about having a church service via the internet with singing is that you can sing to your heart's content without fear of being heard by anyone else but God. Can't carry a tune in a bucket? How about a swimming pool? Doesn't matter to your laptop or even your smartphone. So sing at top volume. Have a blast. The words to the hymns are still shown online. You can listen or take part. I hope you're taking part. That 8-second rule doesn't really apply with singing. You can't, however, just have singing. So how do you promote worship? Week after week. It's been about 6 weeks. I believe it has everything to do with presence. Our congregation wants to know that we care about them, that we are connected to them. Personally, that we demonstrate presence. So how do you change your worship to reflect that presence? How do you translate worship to the small screen, the laptop screen, your cell phone screen? It's a partnership, actually. We are trying to do our part with having a regular service. For the congregation, it requires that you come to your computer screen or your smartphone with an attitude of worship while being on a cyber connection with God. Cyber? Well, remember, Charles said it's a head trip, right? Well, not so different from the standard Sunday service, right? You show up. in mind, body, and spirit. All God asks is that you keep showing up. The next requirement is that you focus. This requires you to put away anything that might distract you. Here we have a cat, and sometimes he does get distracting, but he loves church. If you have a pet, if it's a smartphone, anything that might come between you and your connection with worship, you might strongly consider setting it aside for the period of time it takes you to watch the service, for either 8 seconds or even 20. The third helpful aid would be becoming a student all over again, taking notes, interacting with the service as it were, through looking up references, asking questions, taking notes. Remember, you can stop and pause the service for as long as it takes you to look up a reference. You can always contact the speaker after their talk to make inquiries. Call the church office and ask Barbara to contact the speaker to reach out to you individually. In fact, that's a sincere compliment because it means that you are engaged in the service being given. You can request hymns to be part of next week's service or even special songs to be performed by Tamara Laney. You can even be a part of the next recorded service segment as a spiritual reader, as a speaker, or even special music. The last and final benefit to worship is considering the video presentation as a conversation between you and the various individuals presenting the service on an internet venue. This period of time in our lives is unique, but not insurmountable. And the video presentations of the USCSA services each week are presented as a partnership with the Creator, the author, the friend, and the Heavenly Parent we all rely on. Know also that God hears you wherever you are, using whatever is available to speak to you. Just you. Does God want you to tune in to the services every week? Does God respect cyber worship as well as actual physical body sitting on the pew worship? God wants that conversation with you, always, no matter what type of device it takes. Thank you for enduring this video, this talk, this attempt at encouraging worship. I hope I gave you something to think about. Know that soon, many of you will be getting back to active employment and a paycheck, going to movies, attending actual group activities. But remember, focusing on habitual organized worship of God in a cyber environment is challenging. But you are heard every second of every single day, whether it's worship for 8 seconds or 20 minutes. Know also that whether you are in a group, physically at a church, or watching the service over the internet, God is always present. A long time ago, when I was working at a technical support desk, I heard something that has remained in my head to this day. Prayer is probably the best wireless connection ever realized. Thank you.